Ladies, gentlemen, welcome to the ISS. Members in particular, welcome back. The discussion meeting today on US-Pakistan relations to 2014 and beyond. It has generally been the lot of US ambassadors in Pakistan to live in what the Chinese would call interesting times. Cameron Munter's 2-year term, even on that measure, was particularly noteworthy, including, as it did, the Salala incident, the affair around Raymond Davis, the raid on Abbottabad, as well as the controversies surrounding the US use of UAVs in Pakistan. Against these strains, however, we should also weigh the benefits. Ever since the 2001 invasion of Afghanistan, the US has been the principal international partner for Pakistan as it has waged its own fight against terrorism. And for both sides, the advantages of this deep, security-led relationship have largely outweighed the costs. Last October, and for the first time in years, President Barack Obama hosted Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif to revive in all but name their comprehensive bilateral dialogue. Yet looming uncertainties over the US presence in Afghanistan, and indeed the security situation in Afghanistan after ISAF's withdrawal, could prove the toughest challenge to the relationship in 15 years. How can the US and Pakistan navigate these challenges? What are the risks and practical implications of more, less or better engagement? And what are the opportunities for building more shock absorbers into the relationship? Ambassador Munter will address these questions. He was US Ambassador to Pakistan from middle of 2010 until July 2012. In that time, he guided the relationship through several crises and indeed headed an embassy of 2,500 staff. He previously served as US Ambassador to Serbia, and before that served diplomatic postings in Iraq and policy postings in Washington, D.C. He will speak today on the record for the presentation and off the record for the Q&A, so I will ask the owners of these two to remove these at the halfway point. I encourage you all to do as I'm doing now and switch your phones to silent, and I hand over to Ambassador Munter.
Thank you very much, and let me do the same, please. Great. Well, thank you for this opportunity, and what I'd like to do is speak with you about some of the guiding principles or the ideas that were on my mind as well, those that I learned during my time in Pakistan, and the prospects that the changes that are taking place leave for us in years to come. Mainly, those of you who know a great deal, I think, about Pakistan won't find it new, but I hope that you'll find it through the prism of what I'm describing, that there may be some insights that will be interesting. To begin with, there, as you know and has been written by a number of people, there are the kind of two narratives, the dueling narratives that America has in its relationship with Pakistan. The Pakistani narrative is the narrative of betrayal, the narrative of a series of commitments by America since Pakistan's founding to understand Pakistan as understood by Pakistanis on Pakistani terms, and that the Americans, in promising this, seem never to have kept their end of the bargain. And this is illustrated best by the support in the 1950s for General Khan, and seen in later days as somehow a preference for military dictatorships over democratic institutions. The fact that the Americans didn't take the side of Pakistan, no questions asked, in the wars of 1965 and 1970. The fact that America then pulled away under the period when Zulfikar Ali Bhutto was in power, and then came back in an instrumental way in the 1980s to support Zia-ul Haq, lavishing money and support, of course, in the fight against the Soviets in Afghanistan, only to turn its back once the war was over, the Soviets were gone, and America then washed its hands of Pakistan, only to return as an oscilloscope, comes back and forth, only to return again after 9/11 to seek Pakistan's help. And yet what has been descriptive becomes almost predictive now. And it goes across the different groups in Pakistan, across political lines, that America will betray Pakistan. It's just in the DNA of the Americans. That's the way they act. They are cold, they are not understanding, they are manipulative. They use the phrase variously attributed to different people of, they use us like a Kleenex and throw us away. The American narrative fits neatly into the Pakistani narrative. The Pakistani narrative is a narrative of American betrayal. The American narrative of Pakistan is a narrative of deception, even lying, not trustworthiness. We sign these country up. They tell us they want to be anti-communist stalwarts. They join SEATO, they join CENTO, they join the Baghdad Pact. They want to help us to fight the Soviet threat. You know, that the U-2 that was shot down over the Soviet Union took off from Peshawar in 1960. You know, you build this kind of link, the Americans thinking they are with us in this fight against totalitarianism. And then what do they do after we tell them many times? They use the armaments that we're giving to them so that they'll be our allies. They use them against India. What were they thinking, right? And the Americans are disappointed that 1965 happens. America is disappointed that these arms are used in what is seen as a terrible war in 1970-71, at a time when even Henry Kissinger, who was not known for his statements about human rights or anything of that sort, is saying, you know, what were they thinking? What were they doing to the Bengalis? This kind of question. So what is seen as a great betrayal by the Pakistanis is seen by the Americans as they didn't do what they said they were going to do. Then you have this wave of anti-Americanism coming from Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, as seen by the Americans. Here we have given them, we've pumped this money into the country, and what do? They come up with the most virulent anti-American rhetoric. And yet then, when we have the common task again against the Soviets, they sign up and we work with them, promising, of course, throughout, that they will never develop nuclear weapons, because those are the terms of our assistance. We tell them, say the Americans, don't do it, don't do it. We have reports that you are developing nuclear weapons. Don't do it. Our law says that we must cut off our assistance. The Pakistanis say, Zia says, we would never do that. And then there is clearly evidence that they are doing it. The Pressler Amendment comes into effect in 1990. The Americans turn their back on Pakistan, not in the American eyes because we are finished with them and done, but because the Pakistanis themselves have lied. That's the American idea. Coming back, in 2001, America looks with some trepidation at the Taliban's best friend, diplomatically, through the 1990s, Pakistan, and says, at some point, you know, we really have to have a reckoning about which side is Pakistan on. In the inelegant phrase of you're with us or against us, this comes up in 2001. Under Musharraf, Pakistan does the right thing, according to the Americans. The aid begins to flow, primarily military and intelligence aid, and we begin to build, and we begin to build more. And yet there are disturbing senses that somehow the trends are not going the way the Americans see them. Aren't they against international terrorism? What is this relationship with LET? What is this relationship with Hafiz Saeed? What is going on? This question that comes in the American side. Are they with us or are they not with us? And this narrative, very strong, has come to the point that during the time I was there, and I don't like to say that there's causality, that when I arrived things went straight to hell, and when I departed things got moderately better. I don't want you to draw the conclusion that I had somehow, it was a causal agent of that. But the fact is, by 2010, this set of imbalances, the two narratives, were so deeply etched into our relationship that I think it's going to take a major shift to get out of this rut, out of this groove. And when I come to the end of what I want to say, I'm hoping I can suggest a couple of ways we can do that, because it is very deep and very, very, very strong on both sides. The sense of distrust, the sense of, you know, of course, as Newt Gingrich, that American expert on foreign policy, says, how stupid do they think we are? That was basically summed up the American attitude towards Pakistan. Those of you who studied Pakistan know all the kind of the exasperation that Pakistan expressed towards the United States. Now, if you put into this the situation that there are people who are intelligent enough in the United States to know about these narratives, know about these histories, and want to do their best, not only because they want to do this out of altruism, but out of good policy, to try to repeal these dueling narratives. And the efforts that took place, there was a surge in these efforts about 2007, 2008, led by members of Congress like John Kerry, Joseph Biden, Richard Lugar, Congressman Howard Berman. And this led to the famous development of the Kerry-Lugar-Berman assistance role, which was supposed to be a commitment to a longer-term relationship with Pakistan. Pakistanis had always said, with some justification, that the Americans couldn't see beyond the latest terrorist threat, that their assistance, that the $2 billion per year that we were giving to Pakistan from the beginning of the period after 9/11 was only strengthening the ISI, only strengthening the military, only convincing people who were the friends of democracy in Pakistan that America was committed more and more to working with those anti-democratic institutions for its own purposes. That, plus the erosion of Musharraf's power and the obvious trend towards bringing back democracy, was seen by us, and this was before I was involved in the Pakistani discussion, as a turning point. We are going to create this commitment, the Kerry-Lugar-Berman legislation, where $1.5 billion of a civilian aid, long-term civilian aid, would be committed for a 5-year period after 2008. And this would be the effort to take this oscilloscope, to take this up and down of relationship and smooth it out, to look to the long term, to try to commit ourselves not only to the common fight against terror as understood by American security experts, but trying to also create a long-term commitment, not a one-night stand, but a marriage. There are all kinds of social behavioral models, usually marriage models, that are rife through this period. And you'll hear Hussein Haqqani talk about divorces and things like that. This language is perhaps more useful than traditional social science language. Be that as it may, when in 2008 we made this investment, there was an effort to try to say, how can we do this working with Pakistanis from the point of view of Pakistanis, to say, what can America do for Pakistan? The architect of this in the new administration under President Obama was Richard Holbrooke. Richard Holbrooke set up a system where Richard Holbrooke was the sun and we were all the planets. Those of you who know Richard or knew Richard Holbrooke knew that Holbrooke was, one of the towering egos of our time, but also was a man of rare vision and of incredible energy who could get things done. He tried to put this together so that there would be, in addition to trying to root out Al-Qaeda in the tribal areas, in addition to the training that we gave to the Pakistani military, in addition to the kind of commitment to the ISI and to trying to work with the ISI against the jihadis, there was also this idea that we would put work in energy, that we would work on the Dimer Basha Dam, that we would refurbish the energy that we had built at the dams from the 1970s and 1980s, that we would work in education on the legacy of LUMS, which was, of course, an American project. IBA in Karachi, an American project, to build in these traditions, education, health, women's health workers. In other words, a very ambitious notion about how America could say, you know what, we are with you and we're committed to you. A very idealistic idea. And I'll tell you at the beginning right now, we failed in that. But it wasn't at that time, in 2008, 2009, for want of a good idea. The idea was to repeal this very negative set of mutually reinforcing narratives which had stymied and crippled what we had done. The problem was, and this is from someone who is now retired from the American diplomatic service, to be critical, there's plenty of blame on the Pakistani side. I'll focus a little bit on the blame on the American side right now. The problem was that we did organize ourselves in a way, or were not able to change at that time our organization away from a focus of looking at Pakistan through Afghan eyes. And when you are looking at Pakistan through Afghan eyes, even if you have this monumental aid program, even if you have efforts to do this, you look through a telescope that is called Afghanistan and you see Pakistan, what you end up seeing is the Haqqani network. That is to say, it was, despite the efforts at breadth, at understanding the sense of humiliation that Pakistanis feel when they deal with Americans, the image of the United States as someone who simply doesn't care or that uses Pakistan. Despite that, when those people who were trying to get past that and to work with different kinds of organizations in the broad society, as those of you who obviously read Anatol Lieven's book, this is what I assign to my students to try to get them to figure out the complexity of Pakistani society and the weakness of the Pakistani state, to try to deal with those elements of Pakistan on its own terms. Even as we did this, we organized ourselves in a way through AFPAC that forced us to take decisions that were lopsided. And those lopsided decisions were, every time there was a choice or a decision to be made, where we had to make a choice between security and long-term commitment. We chose security. I arrived in 2010 during the time of the floods. We put a lot of money into the floods. I think one of the reasons, the things that you may recall in that fall, was that people thought there would be billions of dollars worth of damage and the possibility of a famine. We gave quite a bit of high-yield wheat. 1 year later, Pakistan was exporting wheat. Okay? Now, we didn't do a very good job of PR with that. We felt that it was right thing to do and we shouldn't trumpet that. We never got the credit. We never wisely talked about the way we were committed to Pakistan, to Pakistanis. There may have been some skepticism on the part of some Pakistanis that money tended to go to large feudal landowners who were wealthy anyway and just got wealthier. Who knows? The point was, we went in, we charged in at that time, trying to give what our Calvinist friends would say outward signs of inner grace. That is to say, just some manifestation of the fact that the Americans really mean it when they say they're going to help, and they want to do it selflessly. And that was the side of America that when I talked to Pakistanis, they said they liked. They said, look, there are things about America, we may have a 5% approval rating, but more than 90% of the Pakistanis, according to polls, and certainly the Pakistanis I met, wanted to see America live up to a certain standard that they believe America had given to them, the standard of human rights, the standard of generosity, standard of focusing on education, these kinds of things. After that start, however, a series of events took place that you're familiar with and I'll run through. First was the killing of Salman Taseer. And the reason I mention this is not necessarily that it was something that was directly linked to our bilateral relationships, but it was a lesson to us. And the lesson was that the government, the friends of Salman Taseer, among them President Zardari, did not have the guts to stand up for him. And a chill went through what I would call progressive Pakistan in January of 2011, when he was not even willing to go to the funeral, to make a speech, to stand up to the people who had killed the governor of Punjab, not because the governor of Punjab was against the blasphemy law, but because the governor of Punjab was complaining about abuses of the blasphemy law. That to me showed that our investment in the democratic, one of the ideas that we were going to invest in the democratic return, the institutions of the post-Musharraf era, that we were dealing with a very flawed article. Democratic as it is, we had bet a lot of money and a lot of effort, the effort that Richard Holbrooke had put into place. Richard died just 2 weeks really before Salman Taseer was killed, 3 weeks. That effort was based on a very weak democratic set of institutions that we were trying to support. So that was one chill that went through us. I had in my embassy a military attaché whose job, his name was Michael Nagata. He is now in charge of operations for Special Forces in Tampa. But at that time, he would come into my office and say, well, what else could go wrong? And he did this a number of times during 2011. He came in, and sure enough, we had Raymond Davis. Now, those of you who followed the Raymond Davis case know, or should know, that Raymond Davis was not declared to the Pakistanis. Raymond Davis was not declared to the Pakistanis because of his efforts to try to work against people who we were afraid might have some links to the Pakistani government. So just his very presence and his very operation there was something that was bound to engender mistrust if he was caught. And as you know, he was accosted by 2 thugs on the street. He shot them dead in the course of the effort to try to extract him from this situation. A bystander was run over and killed. He was taken into custody, despite the fact that he had a diplomatic passport and had fulfilled the obligations of the Vienna Convention. The Pakistani government said it is too much for us to admit that he has diplomatic immunity. And so for 7 weeks, we discussed what we were going to do about this problem. For me, it was a crash course in learning about Sharia law. For those of you who know how things work with diyat and with the payment of blood money, we realized that had there not been a parallel system of Sharia law in Pakistan, Raymond Davis would probably still be in jail. So I'm grateful to the institution of Sharia law in that country. And then the day after Raymond Davis was released, a drone strike killed about 40 people in in the tribal areas. Whether or not that was meant to be an insult, it was seen by the Pakistanis as an insult. That, this man is out of jail. He is out of jail with the assistance of Pakistani authorities, and the next day you kick us in the teeth. That was not the way the Americans saw it. It was certainly the way the Pakistanis saw it. That timing was unfortunate. But overall, the Raymond Davis case, what it showed was the imbalance, again, between the efforts to try to build what we'll call the Richard Holbrooke or the longer-term relationship, and the subterfuge and the mistrust that had built up at ground level. Having those people who wanted to believe what the Americans were saying, this is going to be different now after 2008, we're going to work, they were chopped off at the knees. And those people who had always believed that the Americans were just trying to pull a fast one on Pakistan had every fear confirmed. And for the rest of the time that I was in Pakistan, I was told, oh, there's thousands of Raymond Davises all over the streets, right? And nothing I was going to do was going to convince them otherwise, right? So this was enormously damaging. General Nagata came into my office. What more could go wrong? Well, it was only 6 weeks until we had the Abbottabad raid. The Abbottabad raid, we had been watching the house in Abbottabad for quite a while. Those accounts that you read in various published in books are true. The president didn't know at the time of the raid with any certainty that was Osama bin Laden, and he took quite a risk to take the raid against the advice of many of his intelligence advisors, as a matter of fact. But he did do it. It was successful. It was seen as an unalloyed victory in the United States, and it was not seen that way in Pakistan. We made it a little worse because we, a few days after the raid, and I don't know if you remember, the first response of Pakistan officially to the raid was, when I first saw General Kiani after the raid, his first words were, "Congratulations." And I mean, sincerely, he said that. If he was acting, he's a great actor. And he may have been, but I take that and other evidence to think that there was no knowledge of his presence in Abbottabad by the high levels of the army and the ISI. I believe that was not the case. And one of the reasons I believe that is that the amount of material that our people took out of the Abbottabad residence was an astronomical amount of material. And I have utter faith that someone in the CIA would have leaked if they had found a smoking gun somewhere in that, and they didn't. At least I have not seen that leak. So I think that the free press gives us some indication that they didn't know. But the fact was, for the first few days, the Pakistani response to Abbottabad was either stunned silence or, from Zardari and others, support and trying to say, how do we work this to further fight our common foe, Al-Qaeda. The American press made this, turned this around when on, I think, Wednesday after the Sunday raid, there was an interview in which a senior American official said, yeah, this shows that the Pakistanis are either incompetent or complicit. That happens to be true, but when you say that in public, you basically rub a country's leader's face in it. And this is par for the course for the kind of sensitivity that we have traditionally shown to Pakistan. So the military and the intelligence officials went to the public and immediately changed the terms of the debate away from what was this man doing in our country to why did the Americans, our putative allies, violate our sovereignty? Coming in from the back, coming in from Afghanistan when we're supposed to be fighting the same foes, and sneaking in, doing this and getting out. General Kiani, at this point we had 150 special operations people training Pakistani experts in the tribal areas. We had millions of dollars worth of equipment that we had given to the Pakistanis, and we're giving to the Pakistanis in the common fight against the jihadis. And as you know, the casualties that the Pakistani army has taken in this fight against the different various groups in the tribal areas is much greater than any of the casualties that the NATO troops have taken in Afghanistan. So when we would go to the Pakistanis and say, do more, that hurt more than hurt. It astonished the Pakistani military leadership, which had 150,000 troops out of its 450,000 troop army fighting these very people in what was seen as at least ambiguous war against those people who maybe are on the side of the Americans, etc. So very difficult problem. What Kayani did is called me and said, I've got to send these people home. I said, if you send these as special operation people home, we have to send home the equipment that they're giving to your troops. He says, I know that. I said, your troops will not have the night vision goggles. Your troops will not have the sniper rifles. Your troops will die because of this decision. He said, I know that. He was willing to do that because of the pressure he felt that the Army as an institution had suffered, and the military and the ISI had suffered as the humiliation of the Abbottabad raid. So we got to go out to Peshawar and watch the C-17s flying millions of dollars of equipment back to the United States in the war that we had hoped to fight with the Pakistanis against the common enemy, the common threat to Pakistan, in addition to this notion, again, the Richard Holbrooke notion of a long-term commitment. And we saw the long-term commitment continue to crumble. After that, there was a statement by Admiral Mullen before the Senate Armed Services Committee, in which he said that the Haqqani network was a virtual arm of the ISI that further dampened relationships. Michael Nagata came into my office, and then came the Salala incident, which was in November of 2011. So actually I want to track this down at some point and find out whether it was every 6 weeks something would happen, whether there's some sort of, divine logic to all this. The Salala incident, as you know, was an incident in which American and Afghan special forces crossed the border into Pakistan erroneously. They gave their coordinates to the Pakistanis incorrectly. The Pakistanis, not knowing who they were, fired on them. The Americans fired back and killed 24 of the Pakistanis. When the Americans came back in, they came in with what those of you who follow these kind of details saw was an AC-130 gunship, which is a very slow-flying gunship that shoots, does not shoot bullets, it shoots projectiles that are about this big, and each of them blows up. So little missiles. So that not only did they kill 24 soldiers, there were no bodies. They basically wiped out a Pakistani border patrol. Now, from the American point of view, it was, we thought we were in a place where there were no Pakistani soldiers. Someone fired at us, we got rid of them. Pakistani said, there was a Pakistani flag above this, you guys have eyes, right? It was the middle of the night, etc. So the accusations went back and forth. I immediately got on the phone to Washington and said, you have to apologize. In fact, it probably would be best if the president apologized. And taking the name of Great Britain in vain, I said, if these were Brits, we'd be apologizing, right? Look, if these were Canadians, if these were, there are whispers going around among my friends in Islamabad that as long as the bodies are brown, we don't apologize, all right? This is not the kind of thing President Obama wants to see. And what I was told by the senior official was, this is again 2011, haven't you read Romney's book? And I said, Romney wrote a book? and he said, yes, and the book is called No Apology. American leaders don't apologize to the rest of the world. American leaders stand tall. It took us 6 months to apologize, which we did. And in the meantime, the supply routes between Karachi and Afghanistan were cut off, pending an apology. And this put us in the position of sending our supplies through the route, the so-called Northern Distribution Network, through the friends, our new best friend, Vladimir Putin, at the cost of billions of dollars. And eventually we did apologize, and now we're sending the troops through. Okay, this shows just how far we had gotten away from the notion, again, the vision, and I try not to make Richard Holbrooke into too much of a saint, because I think he would resent being called a saint. But, that vision that we were working on the same side against a problem that we have in common had basically been eradicated. And by the time I left in the summer of 2012, we were barely speaking with one another. So as we come now through, I've illustrated this to show something that you know already, that is to say that this idea of trying to build a longer term relationship didn't succeed. Many of our assistance programs were seen as these issues went on with great skepticism. And those things that we did, that is adding megawatts to the power grid in Pakistan, building schools, starting businesses, were seen not in the context of America is here to stay and to be friendly and to build a strong and that a strong Pakistan is good for America, but rather was saying this is America trying to buy us at the same time that something terrible is happening, etc. So in fact, reinforcing the mistrust rather than mitigating the mistrust. Where we are now, and where I don't want to go on much longer because I'd like to have questions and answers, is that we are at a point now where we are coming up to 2014, where that lens that I talked to you about, the lens of looking at Pakistan through Afghanistan, for better or worse, will end. It was not a surprise to me that Hamid Karzai has problems with the BSA. And I would say to you right now that I will be surprised if there is a follow-on force. In one of my previous incarnations, I spent a lot of time talking to the staff of Noor al-Maliki in Iraq, and it was also not a surprise to me that we don't have a follow-on force in Iraq. There are very subtle and complex reasons why many of these countries don't necessarily want to see follow-on forces that are not obvious to a lot of our military leaders who are looking at it strictly in a military way, I'm sad to say. I predict then that for better or worse, not because of a choice that we may make, but because of the way politics plays out, we may end up at the end of 2014 with an opportunity to redefine the way that America, at least, deals with Pakistan, that is not through the lens of Afghanistan, because we will not have troops, or we won't have many troops in Afghanistan. In this sense, I think what we would be wise to do would be to try to look at those elements of Pakistan that have an affinity, in my opinion, have an affinity for American culture. And those are much more social rather than political. I'm not sure that having parliamentary to parliamentary exchanges makes a lot of difference in a system where that is run by feudal interests, where democracy is not based on the idea of serving constituencies, but on the idea of patronage in a traditional way. I'm not sure that does a lot of good. I think rather that what we ought to be doing is looking to where we, the United States, have a comparative advantage over most countries in the world. Possible exception is Britain. But where Pakistanis look, they don't tend to send their kids to college in China, despite the fact that they claim their relationship with China is higher than the Himalayas and deeper than the sea, sweeter than honey and other things like that. Despite that, there is the cultural affinity for American education. There is the cultural similarity of philanthropy. That is to say, those of you who know Pakistan know that not all philanthropy is zakat. A lot of philanthropy is secular in that country, and a lot of the reasons that Pakistanis still get educations is through philanthropy. Well, we have our Bill Gateses, and we have a large philanthropic sector as well. We have civic links. I am teaching in Los Angeles now. That's where I'm living. And Los Angeles and Karachi are two cities that have oceans, dynamic business sectors, and gang warfare. I mean, they're made for each other as sister cities. But all silliness aside, I think that there are civic links, there are university to university links, there are business links that are crucial to the relationship, or a healthy relationship, between that United States that is, I think, still not only acceptable, but seen positively by most Pakistanis, and the United States that we have chosen to show, which is overwhelmingly the United States of a counterterrorist, that has true counter-terrorist interests, but where those counter-terrorist interests, at least in the Pakistanis' eyes, have outstripped all other elements of what we do. Finally, I think we'll be wise if we look to the limitations of what America and Europe can or will do in these areas, and do our best to support the opening of India and Pakistan. If there is going to be a change, I don't have confidence that the change, that a lot of reform can come from within the Pakistani political system. Imran Khan notwithstanding, I think, despite the fact that I respect the fact that the man at least talks about corruption, that he at least excites people by saying things that haven't been said, he has not shown himself to be either the organizational or the democratic leader that, in my opinion, can really change things in that country. What will change things in that country is if there is the ability of the very clubby, inward-looking economic structure of that country to expand. I don't think it's going to expand because of Procter & Gamble or Coke. I don't think it's going to expand for any other reason other than an opening to India. And that affinity, if that can grow, is the way, in my mind, that this country can get out of the doldrums that visionaries, I think, like Richard Holbrooke, would like to see. Not that we're going to do it through assistance, but do it through in Poole you would speak of a bank shot, to trying to deal with a region in a post-2014 era where the American commitment is not primarily military, but the American commitment is to business. And when people like me would speak in New York, and I went and gave a talk about business opportunities in Pakistan, I had a room full of Indian Americans who came in and listened. Because these venture capitalists in Silicon Valley don't care about the kind of questions about these traditional security issues. They just want to know whether they can make money, and if they're Indian or Pakistani, maybe they're naive, but they don't care about that. That, I think, is the way forward. Look at the problems that they have, and in as much as we do address the international problems, that we do them as multilaterally as we can, even though that's against the grain of the way that we've treated Pakistan in the past. But water is not a question that we can deal with bilaterally. But it's going to be a big question in Pakistan with the population growth there. That's just one example of something that we have to deal with in a multilateral setting. And in a post-2014 era, I think we can. I think we can take our attention away from the security issue. What does this depend on? It also depends on the ability of the Pakistani military and civilian leadership now to somehow deal with a problem that they have hidden from and have not admitted, which is that the biggest threat to their country is not India, is not America, but it's the jihadis. And that they have to deal with that in some way that is not just killing people, and not just going in with Punjabi artillery to take out Pashtun villages. That doesn't work either. But that they have to address this in a broad way themselves so that the coherence of the country and the attractiveness of Pakistan to India is real. And this is not a foregone conclusion. Those of you who know India know a great deal about India's skepticism about Pakistan. But if that is not overcome, they're going to have problems for years to come. Problems for years to come. Problems for years to come.